which, as you can see, is very much alive. One of the delights of Somosa's boys was to drop his opponents from helicopters into the volcano. The official American attitude to Somosa was best summed up by President Roosevelt. That guy, he said, may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch.
The first Somosa began his career as a sewerage inspector and went on to own the sewers of Nicaragua, right up to the manhole covers. This is the remains of another Somosa interest after the Sandinistas had got through with it, a notorious blood factory known as the House of Dracula, to which poor Nicaraguans would sell their blood for as little as $1 a litre in order to buy food. The blood would then be sold to the United States for 10 times that amount. The year was 1978, 1 year before the uprising. This was Somosa's National Guard, or Death Squad. Funded as part of America's foreign aid program, they were the instrument of American policy in Nicaragua for almost half a century. They were taught to equate all forms of social unrest with communist subversion. They were above the law. They could murder at will. Now reorganized in Honduras and paid by the CIA, they are described by President Reagan as freedom fighters. In 1972, an earthquake destroyed Managua and killed an estimated 10,000 people. The National Guard were quick to react. They diverted aid from abroad, they looted, and one officer reportedly tried to blow open the National Bank.
In the center of Managua, this children's playground was built immediately after the fall of Somoza on the rubble of the earthquake. Somoza had repeatedly refused to build parks and playgrounds in much the same way that he resisted doing anything about the 83% malnutrition or diseases affecting young children. He did, however, find $1 million to send in cash to President Nixon's re-election campaign in 1972. Nixon had said of Somoza, "Now that's the kind of anti-communist we like to see down there." When the earthquake struck, the return on this investment was beyond Somoza's wildest dreams. The United States gave him emergency aid of $57 million, most of it out of US government funds. But the Nicaraguan Treasury reported receiving only $16 million. There was no inquiry about the missing $41 million. Indeed, more of the same just kept rolling in. With the support of the Carter administration, the International Monetary Fund gave Somoza $65 million, just a few months before he fled the country and while he was bombing his own people.
Well, it's important to remember that we found a country in July '79 that had probably 40% of the infrastructure of the country destroyed by the war, and part of it destroyed by the earthquake in 1972, and Somoza didn't repair it, okay? The city of Managua is a very good example of that. Then we found a country with no financial resources. The Sandinista government nationalized 19 different banks, and we found only $3.5 million in the 19 banks. That means 1 day of imports for this country. On the other hand, we inherited an external debt of $1.6 billion, and probably half, $800 million, never were used in this country. Were parked in Miami or Switzerland. However, we are now servicing this debt.
In 1982, the World Bank congratulated Nicaragua for repaying the debts of Somoza, for generously treating the private sector with incentives, and for substantial progress in health and education. At the same time, the bank regretted having to cut back urgently needed loans to Nicaragua because of, to quote, increasing political limitations. In other words, pressure from Washington.
We have been suffering in the last 2 years a sort of financial boycott. The private banks refused to lend to Nicaragua. The multilateral banks, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, have reduced close to 50% the loans to Nicaragua. And that means that we have a shortages of medicines, we have a shortages of food, we had the boycott of the wheat. Now we had the boycott of our sugar exports to the United States. We have a boycott of some spare parts that are not coming on time for the crops. Then is a scarcity of foreign exchange that affects the industrial production, affects the agricultural production, and that affects the normal standard of living of the people. Still, they are happy under these conditions. And they are not easy conditions. They are appalling conditions many times. Check with the people if they prefer this life, very simple life, very austere life, to the life under Somoza. What is going here is that the people realize that this is their own economy, this is their own country, and they are facing an aggression, a foreign aggression. This revolution was not made by a proletariat party. It was produced by a popular insurrection. Everybody took part in the destruction of the dictatorship. This is not a political party. It's a front who made the revolution. And you have in this front different parties, the Socialist Party, the Christian Democratic Party, the Liberals, the Conservatives, all of them took part in this insurrection. Christians, the same time with Marxists, took part in this insurrection. The church, many priests and nuns supported the insurrection, even fought in the insurrection. Now, after 4 years, this is a country that has 60% of the GDP in the hands of the private sector, after 4 years of revolution. This is a country in which the agrarian reform, instead of distributing land to the public enterprises, to the state enterprises, is distributing land to cooperatives and to private peasants. We nationalize all the Somocista land, and this is probably about 35% of the total land of the country, okay? We have created here about 3,500 cooperatives in 4 years, okay? And these cooperatives will provide the self-sufficiency in basic food probably next year. And this country will be self-sufficient in basic food, grains, rice, corn, beans, some vegetables, fruits. And this is essential. That's why there is a slogan here, defense and production. Then production is part of the defense system. If we are able to provide food to the people, health, education, this country is invincible.
Land reform in Nicaragua follows no model. This cooperative is the Sandinistas' ideal, which, as British visitors are constantly reminded, began at Toad Lane in Rochdale in 1844. Unlike Cuba, there is no state farm monopoly. An individual can own as much land as he can work, as long as he does not leave it idle and he reinvests and he pays decent wages. Most of the principal export crops, cotton, coffee, beef and sugar, remain in private hands. Indeed, small private owners are encouraged to accept loans offering low interest rates. In the past 4 years, food production and consumption of basic foods has increased by as much as 100%. Washington says there are food queues in Nicaragua. This is the market in Managua on a normal day.
Most revolutions have wanted to appease their ideals and make their supporters happy with theories soaked in blood. The French, the American and the Russian revolutions have all resulted in vengeance and mass murder. Is Nicaragua any different? Well, this is the maximum security prison at Tipitapa. One of the first things the Sandinistas did was to abolish the death penalty, and it's here that members of Somoza's National Guard are serving sentences for murder and torture. I've come to the prison with Thomas Borge, Minister of the Interior in the Sandinista government, and himself a victim of torture in this same prison.
Thomas Bourget was sentenced to 129 years by Somoza.